Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Talking Points with Matt and Matt. Uh, after quite a long hiatus, we're going to try to get back into the swing of things. This time, we're we're going to be discussing the movie, the 2008 movie Martyrs, which was part of the New French Extremism genre. And if I had to summarize the plot in a sentence, it would be a movie about two women getting tortured. But it's about much more. I would say it was probably. So my co-host here was saying it's probably like in the top 10 most disturbing movies. But it's not disturbing in the sense of a lot of blood and gore. I mean, there's some gore, there's some disturbing imagery, but it's really the disturbing factor really comes in through the psychological horror. Why would someone do these atrocious acts? What would the person experiencing it like? How would their self-image how be affected, or how would their just what would their headspace be? And I mean, really, I guess at the end of the day, you could say the movie's about how to break a person, how to completely and utterly destroy a person's mind to where they're just practically a vegetable. I mean, I guess I could go into a little more detail regarding the plot. Unless you would like to jump in here.
Yeah. So a little more expectation setting maybe before we spoil a lot of the movie. So it's one of those movies that you hear in the vein of other really graphic movies, but as Matt was kind of saying, a lot of the things that are so, I guess, shocking or hard to watch about the movie aren't necessarily because it's gory or brutal. There are pretty graphic scenes, as you mentioned, but it isn't all just every scene isn't somebody, getting their throat slashed and stuff like that. There is that, but that's not every scene, and that's not why it's a hard movie to watch. It is that factor of seeing a person get broken down, and that being a lot of what the movie's about. I did want to mention there are a few really different takeaways, I think, for the movie. There's probably four things that I know I want to touch on, and I know you're going to bring up at least two of them. So I think one of the things I just want to put out there, though, I know we did the episode on Midsummer in the past, but there is this quality that comes along with movies that I think is just really important to take a moment and acknowledge, where it's you can watch this movie and a lot of people who are edgy genre fans could watch and be yeah, that was a good movie. That movie was pretty messed up. And then move on and being yeah, that struck me. But if you sit with this movie for a while, there's a lot of weird, I think, parallels or just interesting dynamics that are worth recognizing. And that's kind of what sets it apart from just a bad slasher movie, So I wanted to lay that groundwork a little bit before maybe you go into the plot and maybe talk about the things we want to discuss and analyze first.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. So basically, I'll try to summarize the plot as quickly and succinctly as possible. It's about these two characters, Anna and Lucy. Lucy was, she was tortured as a young girl by this by an organization, but a particular family, that was part of that organization. And then, she's eventually saved and put in I guess some orphanage or some home for children. She meets Lucy. They become good friends. That's the background of the movie. But the real meat of the movie comes in when you see this domestic scene. You see this boy and girl fighting over a note. And then there's like after that, there's like a pretty pleasant dinner table scene. Well, not pleasant's the wrong word, but a pretty average dinner table scene with a family. The parents talking to the son about career plans and just basic stuff. And then this young woman comes in and just massacres the lot. And you think to yourself, like, oh, this is where it begins. Like, this person with this shotgun must be one of the torturers. And this is, just the beginning of a long line of, or long movie of bloodshed. But what you realize is that's Annie. And that was the family that was torturing Annie. So the movie already like kind of it attempted to, I don't know if confused is the right word, but it attempts to sort of cause you to jump back in your seat a bit, because you end up thinking one thing. It tries to surprise you, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because you think of one thing and then it turns out, well, no, she's actually getting revenge. It's Annie, and she's actually getting revenge against this family.
Wait, I just got to jump in. It's Lucy.
Lucy. I'm sorry. You're right. I got Lucy and Annie confused. That's very important. Lucy and Anna confused. And then so Lucy calls her friend Anna, and of course Anna is like extremely shocked, extremely disturbed that her friend would kill the family. And of course at first she doesn't believe that the family was the right family. She thinks it was all one big mistake. But the other thing about Lucy is and when I first watched this movie, I didn't pick up on this. Someone had to explain it to me. And then the second time I watched it, I knew what I was going in for. But Lucy is like chased by, this emaciated, violent woman. And you never see it's not until later in the movie that you see her face, and you don't know like who it is or even what it is. But what you realize is that woman isn't real. That woman is in Lucy's head, because it was someone that she saw in the torture chamber with her when she escaped. She saw this woman briefly. She had the opportunity maybe to save this woman, but she was like, I got to look out for myself, because that's what people would do in that situation. Of course, that's understandable. But she didn't save this other victim, and so she was torn with guilt. And so this becomes a psychotic manifestation of that guilt. And so whenever she's like, harming herself or mutilating herself, generally the movie will show it as this other person harming Lucy, but it's actually Lucy harming Lucy.
Okay. I think I want to sum up the rest of the movie real quick, and then we can dive into things, because I think you do need the context of the whole movie to give takeaways, unfortunately, so we are going to spoil the whole thing. So pretty much after Lucy kills the whole family and calls Anna, Anna shows up, kind of cleans up the mess. There is a moment where the mom in the family isn't actually dead, and Anna thinks about helping her because she thinks that Lucy picked the wrong family. This leads to a little bit of drama between Lucy and Anna, and Lucy ends up bludgeoning the mom to death, for good measure. And then this leads to a big scene with Lucy, where Lucy and that hallucination of the woman she didn't save, she thought the hallucination might go away once she killed the people who tortured them. That's how she was like trying to resolve it. She's like, well, I killed these people. You can leave now. You're safe. I did what I can. And then when the demon didn't go away, she pretty much dramatically kills herself. I think that's a fair way to summarize that, which leaves Anna with about 5 dead bodies. And Anna still at this point kind of thinks that she has found the wrong building, or these are potentially the wrong people. And she like vaguely has tried to hide the bodies in this hole in the backyard. But then she hears a sound, which is like in a cupboard or something like that, opens it up, and there's this big stairway down into what ends up being like a high-tech torture facility. And then when Anna goes down there, of course, she finds like a very gnarled and beaten and distraught woman that is chained up and not wearing clothes. That is the woman that we just saw as it was Lucy's hallucination. So it's the same woman. Anna tries to help her, so she releases her. That woman is completely in shock, traumatized, completely broken as a person. There's some pretty horrific scenes there. She tries to like cut off her own arm, and then the woman who was trying to kill herself tries to kill Anna, but people in essentially almost borderline what I would imagine a SWAT team would look like walk in the house, shoot that prisoner in the head, and then they start talking to Anna and treating her poorly, and they pretty much are the organization tied in with the family that is torturers, right? This leads into pretty much the last half of the movie, and like Act 3, where they pretty much tell Anna, hey, we torture people, generally young women or women early in their life, because we believe that if they're more likely to survive immense amounts of pain. And I think this is where you're going to probably want to jump in and maybe add some clarification. But they pretty much torture these women because they think that in this realm of surviving and beyond human amount of pain, they could potentially be closer with the afterlife or get a sight into it beyond like, they were kind of disregarding moments where people die and come back to life, saying that's just a moment of peeking in. But they're saying if you can survive a certain amount of pain and suffering, you can get so removed from existence that you can like be in that realm for maybe hours and then come back and report what there is after. So that's what the organization's about. Was that a good summary of that? Okay. Then the rest of the movie is really just Anna being tortured in a very dehumanizing way. I don't want to really go into detail because it's really hard to watch. All sorts of bad things happen to her. And eventually, after she is more or less skinned alive, she is somehow still alive. And they more or less proclaim that she's gotten further than anybody else has. And the woman who described the whole setup to her that runs the organization comes back, and in her like generally her last breaths, she is able to like report back what she saw during her hallucinated, removed, detached experience. But the audience doesn't hear what she has to say. Afterwards, the woman who runs the organization calls all the people there. So a bunch of old people show up at the house in like suits and stuff. And it seems like they're going to get this big presentation of what she said. And then that woman, the old lady in the bathroom who runs the organization, ends up pretty much killing herself. And that's the movie, right? So we just took we took a hour and 45 minute, put it in about 8 minutes there. So now we can get started on commenting on it, because I think it does have to be kind of taken as a whole to really express some of its parts. So you can fill in any pieces you think I might have glossed over, and we can start going on what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I actually don't know. I don't think I'd have to double check this. But I think the woman that Anna finds is different from the woman in Lucy's hallucination. I think it's just a different torture victim. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But I don't really have anything to add to your summation of the movie. You did a good job. So I just get straight to the interpreting. I guess so. What I worry about like a movie like this is I worry that it's going to be too, like any movie that's like kind of somewhat philosophical, you're always worried that it's going to be like either very preachy or like just, insufferable and conceited. And, it's hard to like, I think, do a philosophical movie right in many ways. So, and as we've said, like this movie is on many like top 10 or top 15 most disturbing movies list. But still, if you watch it, like I watched it 2 times, and the first time I didn't get as much out of it as I did the second time. But that was just because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't expect all the beating, all the filleting, and all that stuff. So, but the second time, when I knew, okay, that's going to happen in this scene, this is going to happen in this scene next, it's like, okay, now I can actually think a bit more deeply about the movie. And I think it does hold together, as like, I think the theme does hold together, or the themes. I mean, there's always multiple themes competing in any, story, any narrative that is being told, and in whatever format. Like, one of the interesting themes for me, I guess, is the religious theme, because I sort of take the organizations, the reason for their existence, you could almost say, is to prove that there is something you can, that there is a space you can transcend to. Like, there's some afterlife, there's some, existence beyond this existence, and we're going to prove it by making people suffer to the extreme. So I think that's like, it was a very Christian film, I think, in that sense. The idea of, you come to God through suffering, you come to God through struggles. I mean, and Christianity, the movie's literally called Martyrs, and Christianity has a whole history of martyrs. There's no shortage of martyrs. I mean, there's no shortage of martyrs in most religions. I'm just most familiar with Christianity. But then at the end, if I may go ahead and just say something about that, when Anna whispers into Mademoiselle's ear, there's sort of like, I guess my gut interpretation. I mean, there's no one interpretation for any of these things, but my gut interpretation is that Anna said something to the effect of, there is no all-loving, all-knowing God, because, I mean, it's basically the problem. I guess, to put it in a phrase, and I think I might have said this to you the first time I talked about it, this movie's about theodicy, is the problem of evil. And I think the film concludes by saying, well, that is a problem, and you can't have an all-loving, all-knowing God and have this much evil in the world, and have people do this much evil. So I'd like to hear your response to any of that.
Well, so part of the movie that I don't necessarily like is I do think that whole ending sequence of events isn't, it's, I mean, it's intentionally vague, but it kind of gives away certain things, and I just don't know how well I like it, because it shows her on this table like filleted, and she's somehow still alive, and it like zooms in her eyes, and it kind of like implies that she does have an actual transcendental experience. And when Mademoiselle comes out, or the guy that like works with her comes out, he says that she, occupied some space from a certain time to another time for 2 hours. So it's like they have some way apparently of measuring this. Yet whatever she tells the woman is enough to make her kill herself, which implies something that is like nihilistic, I guess. So it kind of is odd, because it kind of implies she does have a transcendental experience, yet whatever that experience was not good enough to justify existence to the person who's been seeking more information about what that means. And I don't really know what to take away from that, other than it is something vaguely atheist. Now, and
if I may jump in really quickly, sorry,
yep.
But I was just going to say, I feel like another possible interpretation could be just a reflection on Mademoiselle's selfishness. Like, she found out there is an afterlife, or she found out something great, and so she kills herself in order to go to this great place. She killed herself because she got the information she wanted, and she doesn't want to share it with anybody. She got what she needed to know, and she did, apparently got the information that was going to help her, and so she was done. And that could be like a reflection on, say, a religious hierarchy's tendency for, those at the top to try to get what they want, and and not care about, their parishioners, or not care about, the poorer people or the lesser people in their faith group.
I'm comfortable with that narrative or that theme, but I think something that in the form of the narrative might actually make more sense, or is, I mean, it might be a stretch, but I think it better squares the circle of what I think I just have an issue with in terms of the narrative, is it's very possible that Anna suffered silently for the last 20 minutes of the movie, transcended existence, saw the light of God, and then had the gall to then lie to the people who tortured her's face to, tell the rotten people that they actually do have no reason to live and no hope, whether that's true or not. Because the thing that I was thinking of during those torture scenes at the end, and this is kind of, I think this is maybe a good polarizing thing to bring up. When Lucy's tortured in the beginning, and how she even escapes in the beginning in the flashback it shows, it's essentially because she got lucky when she decided to fight back. And there is even a throwaway line that says, "Oh yeah, that's the girl who escaped. She got lucky because that's when we didn't really have our stuff together. We were out of like the old slaughterhouse. She was able to escape. That won't happen anymore." And by the time they're torturing Anna, it's like very secure. And Anna was very resigned to the beatings, more or less. There's one scene where she fights the chains violently, and then she pretty much gives up. And then the rest of the movie is her being tortured despite giving up, and then she transcends existence or whatever. This brought to mind the whole myth of Sisyphus. So all these other people were not able to transcend, I guess, because they kept fighting, right? They would suffer and suffer and suffer, and then they would resist it even though it was futile. And there was this weird feeling I had watching Anna give up, because these people are like torturing her in the most impersonal way possible for their own ends that are very, they don't really even care about Anna. They're like, well, hopefully she's the one who transcends, but we're just going to torture her whether she is or not. Like, she's such a means that she's like not even a person at all, even though she's the most important person in a way. But I was thinking about the myth of Sisyphus a lot, I guess, because I was just thinking like, she isn't even fighting. And it's odd that people who are like martyrs in like the almost what's the word for it, in like day-to-day life, I almost would use that term in a derogatory way, because a lot of people just choose to make their own lives harder so they can like kind of feel like they're helping other people, and it's like, oh, it's okay, I'll suffer for you. And I almost kind of in a Randian way, I kind of look down on that. And I kind of felt those impulses I have when I watched her give up, because I understand that it's futile, and I understand there's not really a point of fighting back. But is that really honorable? Or is that like a sign of good character on how she was? It wasn't that she was just broken. It was that she was like beyond broken so easily, so quickly. But that was also the reason, I think, why she transcended, So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, or how that ties in.
I mean, so I don't know. The movie doesn't really make clear like how long the torture goes on. But I can't really make any moral judgments on Anna, just because I think, I mean, that's one of those situations you'd never know how you would respond in that situation until it happens, because it's so different from everyday life. It's so out of the blue. It's so extreme, hence New French extremism. But I mean, I sympathize. Like, I feel like most people would probably end up giving up, and they would probably end up giving up pretty quickly. I don't really see that as like, I don't really judge that either way. I just see that as probably, I mean, some people though, I mean, they do have a will to live, and I mean, there have been literal stories or books or you've heard in the news, someone who was trapped in a basement for 15 years who survived and, then managed to be a functioning member of society. So people can survive terrible conditions. People survived the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. People survived the gulags under the Soviet Union. So it's definitely possible for people to survive in horrible, horrible conditions. But I think most people in the situation where they're constantly tortured, they know nothing but pain at that point. Their only existence is receiving pain. And in fact, one time Lucy what is it? I've forgotten the scene specifically, but like there's a scene where she like deliberately misbehaves and gets beaten because like that's her only like we're social beings, and so there's a scene where like she wants the pain because it's her only the only way she's being perceived in this situation is through the beatings, through the kickings, through the all this terrible stuff, and so I don't know. It's a very interesting movie from a psychologist's perspective. Um, again, for the reason of like, how would any of us interact? Like, how would any of us survive in that situation, or what would we do? And also like just the toll that abuse can take on a person. I mean, that's kind of an obvious statement, but this is like extreme abuse, the most abuse like one person could probably go through without being killed.
The point I'm trying to make is less in like a literal judgment way, but it's more of like analyzing the movie. The two main characters, Noir, Anna and Lucy, and if you contrast them, and maybe this is because some of my more favorite movies I've stumbled on in like the last year kind of do have like two female leads that like overlap and contrast in weird ways. But the Anna and Lucy contrasting like a lot of their dynamics is part of what makes the movie so appealing. So, because the whole thing with Lucy is she was tortured as a kid. I don't know if they said it, if they spelled it out right in the movie, but a lot of the descriptions of the movie or the commentary I saw implied that she was trapped there for a little over a year. So I don't know how long Anna was tortured for, but Lucy was tortured for about a year. She was defiant, and then because of her defiancy, I'm not saying it's necessarily causal, but I'm saying the director chose to make Lucy defiant, even though she got tortured that long, and then she escapes, right? In the end, she succumbs to her own vices. She succumbs to the trauma of that event, right? That's what fuels her revenge, and that's what fuels the trauma that leads to her killing herself. But then you have Anna, who I don't want to say she does the opposite, but a lot of things that Anna does is accepting what Lucy feels and then trying to moderate it. That's her whole character. So Anna's like, okay, it's cool that you're stalking those people that you think might have been the torturers, but I can't believe you killed them. So her whole character is kind of like the moderation of Lucy. But in that, it's like, well, Lucy did get out, though. Was that because of her defiant nature? I don't know. But the director chose to make one of these characters the one who got out, and the other one's the one who was tortured, used as a tool, and then dies anyways. And it's not that I'm casting the moral aspersions. I'm more saying I don't want to assume that was just for narrative convenience, or if he chose those attributes of the characters for a reason. So he is saying, in a way, if you choose to like read it that way, that there is some value to kind of punching back, and like even if it's all for naught, because in the end, even though Lucy's spitting the food out on the guy got her hit more, that's also like she ended up getting out because they made an error when they were punishing her. So it's kind of, I don't want to say that there's for sure something there, but I think it just seemed like so apparent to me, especially if you think of if you're in like a tortured situation where you're literally conditioned to obey in like a heinous scenario. It would be really easy to go along to get along. And the fact that Lucy was still fighting back after a year, like, doesn't seem random to me. That's the kind of thing I think I was trying to explain, I guess.
I guess we do definitely have a disagreement then on our interpretation, because the movie does not make me think of the myth of Sisyphus in that way. In fact, I don't really even see. I don't really even see a moral in the movie. I don't really even see I don't really see where it's like, if you're passive, then you're gonna get run over. You're gonna get you're gonna become a doormat. If you're active and defiant, you're gonna survive. I mean, because Lucy doesn't survive in the end, right? Lucy kills herself. Lucy, in the end, is succumbs to her own. I mean, her own demons, succumbs to the trauma that she experienced. So nobody in the movie ends up, doing well. Everyone is, I mean, and you know, we don't see Anna die as far as we know. Like Anna's, I mean, the end of the movie, she's just like in this like solution. It's like she's technically alive, like her body's alive, but I think like at the end of the movie, she like stops being responsive altogether. But she was like responsive for those 2 minutes. Mademoiselle's also dead. Like,
and in a way they both get their revenge if Lucy did like lie to Mademoiselle or something. And obviously Lucy got her revenge, but like Anna in a way kind of did if she's bare bad news. And that would undercut my narrative about the director implying anything about losing battles being worth fighting anyways. I just think it's a plausible reading, I guess. But I'm okay if we agree to disagree, at least on that point. That's fine. There's a lot of ground to cover in the movie beyond that point.
I mean, I think I mean, I really wouldn't want to say this is like a nihilistic movie because, as I say, I still see it as a very Christian movie in a lot of ways, and Christianity is not nihilistic.
Okay, I think this is a big disagreement then, because I don't think it was glorifying martyrs. I thought this movie was almost satire about martyrdom. Like, I don't think this movie was actually about why being a martyr is a good thing, I guess. Okay, so here's the case, I think, for being nihilistic and being anti-martyrdom, is the whole thing is the people who are trying to artificially engineer martyrs are acting in a way that is clearly immoral to every person who watches the movie. In the movie, the bad guys are clearly the cult operatives. They're torturing people to artificially induce something that they think will give them like forbidden knowledge. And they glorify martyrdom, but it's almost to make light of Christians. It's more of like, it's almost like taking suffering as a virtue to like the absurd degree to show how absurd it is. That was my impression of the movie. I don't think the director, and I haven't watched director commentaries, but I didn't get the degree that the director actually respects suffering. I thought he was just showing like, here's people at breaking points, and here's the like absurdist extreme of certain like religious tropes. That's what I thought it was more saying, or at least that was my takeaway. I mean, he could have not been going for it, but that was the impression I got.
So my takeaway was, see, in many ways, I just don't feel like their director had a takeaway. And when I say that, what I mean is I feel an extreme. So this is sort of a parallel then maybe between Midsommar, although I think there's more of a message. I sensed more of a message from the director in Midsommar than I do from the director of Martyrs. I truly, I don't really think it's a satire. I don't even think it's really necessarily a critique of anything. I think it is a sort of a blank canvas on which the audience is supposed to fill in the dots on their own. Like I truly almost felt like it was directorless, and like this movie was just found somewhere on a desert island, and I put it in, and you know, here it is, and I don't know who made it. I don't know why they made it. So that is sort of why I like this movie so much. Actually, was the almost the lack of message or the lack of moral, and that's not even necessarily nihilism, but it is a I don't know. I guess it felt more like real life in that sense. It almost felt like a documentary, but I guess I say it felt like real life because of that lack of a moral or lack of a overarching message. It just felt like, you know, it's sort of a mix of the mundane and the extreme. It's sort of a mix of the absurd and the divine, for lack of a better word. It just seemed to encompass what it means to be human in you know, every possible way. Again, in that way, it was just a snapshot of what I think human life is. But that snapshot was not telling me to believe this or that. It was just a snapshot, and whatever I took away from that snapshot and whatever you took away from that snapshot.
That's fair. I think a lot of the power of the movie comes from how it contrasted to different things that are similar. And I know, like, there's probably dozens and dozens of episodes ago, I was defending the concept of revenge, and you weren't particularly sympathetic at that time. And this was probably like 2 years ago at this point, so who cares? But I recall that because the thing that was most striking, and this is, the more I talk about the movie, the more I like it. And it's because the the breaking into Act 2 moment, the inciting incident, is her showing up at the house with the shotgun, killing the family. And there are moments in this scene, such as the dad opens the door, he gets shot by a rifle, right? He flies back, right? It's very graphic. She walks over, kills the mom. Then she looks at the boy at the dining table, and she's like, do I kill him? Has a short conversation with him, decides to shoot him. This is very personal. She walks in. You see this personal scene where they're at the kitchen table eating breakfast, and she kills the parents who tortured her, or presumably tortured her, which does get validated. And then she's like, do I kill their kids too? And then she does. This is like the most personal revenge to her. But then by the end of the movie, you grasp how absolutely impersonal everything is to the cult, right? So the cult is just like, they're like clocking into work. It even shows, but late in the movie, there's literally a scene where it's like, I think the dad either like feeds her or beats her up, and then it shows him walk up the ladder, and then he goes and he takes a shower, and he's kind of like wiping something off of him, and he's like, ew, I'm gross, like a little bit. And it's like he completely is so removed from torturing the person because he doesn't care. It's just like, yeah, this is the role I play, whatever. Which it brings up certain things like the Milgram experiments or the Stanford prison experiment. In a way, it's kind of like that too, where it's like he's choosing to assume a role and it has nothing to do with his identity. But to the people who tortured her, that she showed up and killed in the beginning of the movie, it was such an impersonal act. She didn't. They really didn't care. She's a means to an end, and to her, it was the most violating act possible. Right. So you have like this like disproportionate level of investment in the revenge. And it's kind of bizarre because that doesn't really happen in real life, but you get like the most extreme version of revenge imaginable combined with like the most impersonal level of torture. It's not like a serial killer. It's not like a weird sexual thing. It's literally like, no, hopefully you'll get us to actualization, baby. You're really just a tool. That type of pairing is just crazy to see in a movie, I guess. It's like so extreme. And it doesn't really mean anything, right? There's no a priori like meaning to what the takeaway should be there. But I just found that like so bizarre and interesting.
Well, maybe this then is an extension on the impersonal way they're being tortured, or the impersonal feeling way the torturers feel to the victims. But I feel like the whole movie itself is extremely impersonal. I felt almost like I was just God looking down, watching this happen, and not really extremely invested, but like interested. I mean, obviously, I had my own like revolt, like everyone, or if most people, or probably everyone who's going to watch this movie is going to feel like uncomfortable in certain parts and revolted in certain parts and feel sad in certain parts. You have all the normal human emotions. But I guess I just want to keep on emphasizing how impersonal the movie felt to me. How because you were kind of talking about how personal it is for Lucy and how that was her revenge. But again, it was like these characters. You don't really dive into the mind. I mean, you dive into the history of these characters and you dive into their past trauma a little bit. I mean, at least in terms of the when they were tortured. There's some hints like when Anna calls her mom after the whole family is dead and Lucy kills herself. There's some implied that Anna's mom was like abusive. But you don't really like know that much about these characters. Like these characters are sort of just pawns for the universe, or these characters are just like little puppets being like manipulated behind the scenes. It was definitely not one of those movies where like, you meet a main character and you learn all about them and you feel attached to that main character. You feel, deep sympathy, deep empathy for their suffering. But other than that, I couldn't really tell you that much about their personalities or about who they were, who they wanted to be, their hopes, their dreams. And normally I like movies. Like I really love books or novels. I really love novels like that are first person, that let you dive into the mind of a character. That's like my favorite story. But this is very different from that kind of story. But it works.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a virtue of the movie in this context, because like, well, one of the things, if you watch movies with the stereotypical horror movie where like teenagers are getting killed, if the teenagers are annoying, like those movies are almost in a way designed to make you root for the killers, right? Because it's very stylized, it's very dramatic, it's very over the top. And if the characters are annoying and you kind of don't like them anyways, then you can enjoy stylized deaths on minor characters. But this whole movie is like, it gives you pretty much a blank canvas, except for knowing their trauma, and it lets you root for them purely because of what's happening to them is so bad. Now, in terms of like, I want to push back a tiny bit against the tone of being like, they were doing just what happened, because it's like, it wasn't really a destiny or fate movie to me in any capacity. I know that's not what you're trying to say, but I just want to emphasize that which one is it? When she first comes back with the shotgun and kills the family, that clearly wasn't the plan for the cult. The cult seemed like they kind of had created an organization at that point, like 15 years later, when she shows up, that is now like pretty much covered all its bases and everything they do is inevitable. But when she shows up and kills them, that was very much a stray point of, she did something that wasn't part of the plan. That's not supposed to happen. And I don't want to imply the director meant anything of it, but in like a stereotypical conservative way, that's the part of the movie that is about free will, even though most of the movie is about you're resigned to your situations. If somebody wanted to draw kind of broad generalizations, and I'm not saying that should be your takeaway, I'm just saying that's a reading.
No, I guess what I mean is, so to contrast it with Midsommar again, I mean, there are a couple anthropology students in that movie, and I bring that up because when I'm not so much saying this is a fate movie, but I'm saying I watched it like I was Jane Goodall watching a pack of chimpanzees. Like, I watched it as an anthropologist. I watched it just seeing animals, respond to different stimuli. That's how detached, I guess, I sort of felt towards the universe, which I don't know if that's like a metaphor for how detached Anna becomes after being tortured for so long. But that's my main sticking point there.
For me, I would just say, and this lets me kind of bring in another thing I wanted to mention. It didn't feel realistic in the sense that I think that cults in the movie, I just didn't find them particularly believable in like a real way. That's why I kind of thought that was like an absurd parody to some extent, because it makes for a good plot of a movie and it sets up some interesting concepts, but it is like absurd. And I'm not going to say what movie this is because it is relatively recent, and I don't want to spoil it. But there's a recent movie that came out, and the ending pretty much reveals that the whole movie was about taking a group of people, putting them in a situation where they will all die. But at least we learn some important scientific things that would take hundreds of years to study if we didn't do it. And in a way, this movie felt similar, except instead of it being like, oh, we can have a scientific breakthrough, it was, well, let's see if we can contrive a religious or a theological breakthrough. And even though those are very different things, they're pretty much in common parlance, those are seen as the opposite things. It still has this consequentialist ethos that underlines both the organizations in these two movies. And in this one, it was like, hey, maybe it's okay if we take random women and torture them. I mean, we're really only torturing a handful of women at a time, and maybe we'll find the truth of the universe. And if it's phrased in that way and you believe it, that I guess I could see why in the context of the movie that is enough of an incentive for the people to move forward. Um, but it's clearly like impossible to watch that movie without thinking that what's happening is to some degree pretty wrong. Um, and I thought that was interesting because it's saying like, can we sacrifice these girls or this small amount of women or test subjects if we can manufacture a important enough takeaway, right? And that brings up things like Kant and all that. So throwing that out there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the movie's not. I mean, I think the movie is realistic in how it portrays. I mean, I'm not an expert on torture or the psychology of torture, and obviously, it's absurd in the sense that why would a great society of theological society or whatever spend so much time torturing a small number of individuals? What are they about resources? Blah blah blah. Like I get all that, but again, I think what it was so realistic. And this is again, how it's contrasting things. Even though in many ways I was watching it like an anthropologist and very detached, I still felt you felt every blow, you felt every punch, you felt, uh, from one creature to another, you felt the suffering. In fact, there were a couple times, this is going to make me sound like a wuss perhaps, but there were a couple times when I was like, my stomach feels a little weird right now. I didn't throw up or anything, but I was like, and because when I watched it the first couple times, I actually like stopped it like once or twice just to go to the bathroom and like kind of just take a breather, because the torture scenes are very intense, and it does sort of, even though it's very impersonal in the sense that you don't know a lot about these people. I guess I'm echoing what you were saying earlier. It's very personal because of the minute detail, the way they show in minute detail the torture. They don't just show one torture scene and she's transcended. They show many torture scenes, and they show Anna deteriorate slowly over time. We don't know how long. Could be weeks, could be months, could be years. And that's, I mean, it's a hard watch. No question about it. And I don't think we're really giving it justice. It's really one of those movies which you have to see to fully understand, and it's sort of, it's really hard to put it into words, put the experience of the movie into words, or put the movie itself into words. Because I could explain to you like what they do to Anna, but that probably wouldn't give you the same. That wouldn't you wouldn't feel the same emotions. You'd be like, ew, that's disgusting. Why are you talking about that? But then you see it on screen and it's like, you feel your heart palpitating, you start to sweat, like, so it's very personal in that sense. It's like, so if I said earlier, I was like God watching, looking down, watching all this happen. Those moments were like when God, is extending, his heart to mankind, right? It's like God, like feeling the suffering of all the beings down on earth, even though, he's like not able or willing to do anything about it in this hypothetical interpretation of the movie.
Okay. Do you want to say anything on the consequentialism part I raised, or nah? It's okay if you don't.
I mean, again, I guess if are you thinking about like it from the cult's perspective? I mean, you could argue from the cult's perspective, they have a very, the ends justify the means attitude. But I still stand by the movie itself is not preaching a moral. I don't think I could find a single moral in that movie, to be honest with you. And again, that's not nihilism. That's not me saying the movie's saying give up, everything's hopeless. But the director's definitely not preaching. And the movie is not preaching consequentialism, is what I'm trying to say.
Well,
nor is it
I
really even critiquing consequentialism, I don't think.
So my maybe this we need to take a step back and say where I come from when I make statements like that. I don't care what the director intends at all. Frankly, I try not to listen to what directors have to say most of the time because directors are just people, and a lot of times if you hear them talk, it really breaks the illusion of movies that are larger than life. So I actually don't really like listening to them. So when I'm kind of throwing these things out there, it's less because I think, oh, this is what he wanted to say, but it's more like this movie showed something that I think is real to some degree. And even whether he intended it or not, he showed a very brutal group justifying a means to the ends, and that's like the climax of the movie is them like using a person for as a means to an end. And it's almost like it's hard to say it's not anti-consequentialist for me because the people who are torturing the girl are essentially the villains of the movie because they're mentally destroying people so they can get elite hidden knowledge. That's their goal. And I just, like, I don't think that's meant to be defended either. The whole movie, you're supposed to feel very much like the torture's wrong and root for the Anna and Lucy throughout. Even though it's not like you didn't get to meet them for an hour before all the stuff hits the fan. So I think that's a valid reading, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't care if he intended it or not. I think it's valid reading. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay, so I guess I'm using the director's, like, when I say the director doesn't preach, I mean, let's take the director out of the picture. I'm not actually specifically concerned about what the director is saying, but what I'm saying is the meaning. I don't. How would I put this?
I don't think it was intentional. I don't.
Well,
I don't at all.
No. I think I'm trying to say something a little different. I think what I'm trying to say is the whatever meaning you get out of it. I don't think like I guess when you say they talk about the villains of the movie being the people that torture society or torture these girls. That's like, yeah, of course everyone hates, like, everyone's against torture, of course, except torturers. Yeah, of course. But like I don't even think there was a moral to this movie. Like, I don't even think, and then that's not saying I care what the director thinks. That's saying I didn't take away a moral. I didn't take away a message. And, whether that's like, whether that was the director's intention or whether that was just my own, like, state of mind in that moment when I watched those movies. But I really didn't. I mean, I said it was like a snapshot of life or like a documentary, and that's sort of what I meant. It was just like showing stuff. It was almost like a collage in a sense. It was like a collage, and you're just supposed to respond to the collage in your own way. Now I don't know. I don't know if someone would say that contradicts my earlier point about the Christian messaging, which was really the only messaging I could pick up on if I'm truly trying to grasp for messaging. I thought it was a movie with almost a total lack of messaging. That's really what I'm trying to say, and maybe I'm not explaining it well, but
yeah, I think I just I agree with a lot of movies being canvases for interpretation. And I don't think there were that many broad themes, right? So I didn't walk away from it thinking, oh, there's just one broad theme. But there are like random scenes that I think are saying something about humans, right? And that's kind of what you're getting at too. And that's not really a moral claim. It's just how people are, maybe. Now, there's just certain things that happen in the movie that because I have, a philosophical framework that labels certain things, I can say, here's how it showed this dynamic. And maybe it wasn't intended. But because of those frames I bring in, I can see an argument for certain morals could have been intended if the person came in with a certain framework. That's why I'm bringing it up, more or less. It doesn't mean that's right or wrong. I do want to bring up a random moment in the movie that I found interesting, I guess. And it's not super noteworthy, but I wanted to at least touch on it. And well, I mentioned it when I summarized the movie, but it's the part where the mom of the family doesn't die, and Anna tries to help her get away, more or less. So she dragged out the rest of the bodies, thrown them in the backyard, and then she realized the mom's still alive. And she is not convinced that these people were necessarily the torturers of Lucy. So take that with a grain of salt, because she didn't, that wasn't verified yet at the time. And she somewhat knowingly doesn't trust Lucy, because Lucy is hallucinating, and Anna seems fairly aware of that. So she's not the most reliable character in the movie. And she, to some degree, almost helps her escape until Lucy comes down, confronts her, and then it's pretty much says, "You don't trust me. You don't believe me. How dare you? Just like all the people who didn't believe me before." And then she kills the woman. And that was this weird moment, I think, and maybe this is me filtering it through my autism brain just for the fun of it. But it's almost, how do people act when they're conflicted with like a weird value structure situation? So like if you think of sitcoms, which is I guess like the inverse of this movie, the whole thing with sitcoms is you're like clash with like multiple competing faux pas. That's like kind of what happens in sitcoms, and then they have to like make a decision and something awkward happens. And in this, it was kind of like she was struck with, I'm cleaning up all these dead people because my friend who I love and have been friends with for 15 years killed them, probably rightfully so, but she isn't fully responsible. And then she has this like loyalty structure, but she doesn't want to kill somebody, and she wants to help, and she has the uncertainty of what's even happening, and she has to act. And this is like a whole moment where it's like, how do people act under pressure, and all these things combining at once. I thought that was a good like glimpse into how complicated things can be. I know that's a very unlikely circumstance for anybody, right? But it's almost like an example of impossible decision making, but in the setting of a horror thriller movie. I don't know if you found that part of the movie intriguing, but I thought that was like one of the most compelling 2 to 5 minutes on screen that was like had so much suspense and drama in it. So yeah, I just want to at least shed some light on that part.
I mean, the whole movie, you could say, sort of illustrates the maybe the differences between following a strict moral code or trying to follow a strict moral code and actual behavior. It's like this is sort of the issue with moral philosophy, right? If you like, there's been studies where like moral philosophy professors don't actually behave any better than the average person. And so, Anna in that scene is conflicted with her desire to help people, her desire to not see someone needlessly suffer. But also, Lucy is her friend, and she wants to help Lucy as she loves Lucy. She trusts Lucy. She wants to help Lucy with, as much as she can. But as you say, she's conflicted because Lucy is, not right in the head, not for her own fault, of course, but just due to the trauma. And so she's a little suspicious of that in that sense. And so just the contradictory like drives or the contradictory motivations that people can have, and the inconsistent ways that we sort of have to behave in different scenarios at different times. And I guess I say have to behave because, I was going to go in a long spiel about the uselessness of moral philosophy, but I'll leave that for another podcast. But again, needless to say, it's like our morals come from our feelings, and so our feelings are very contradictory and confusing and crazy, and so our morals are contradictory and confusing and crazy. Another example of why this movie doesn't have a moral. I didn't take a moral away from it.
Yeah, and this probably gives more credit to your view of things too, but it almost I told you before we started recording that because I went in fairly blind, but before it's revealed that the family actually was in on the torture, I was kind of thinking this movie might be about the difference between institutions and like vigilantism, in the sense that institutions are slow and impersonal, but maybe you're more likely to get the right verdict. And if you're watching the opening scene where Lucy gets vengeance, and the whole time you're thinking, oh God, she might just be killing an innocent family. It's horrifying for a completely different reason. But then, once it's revealed that that was the right family, for me as the viewer, like, it's easy to talk about it and forget that there was a time in my head where I was very concerned that was an unjustified act of revenge, right? Because if she was wrong, she just killed 4 innocent people, including 2, young people. And that's like a tragedy. That's like the most tragic thing possible. So to some degree, by having this one event that happens in the movie, by having different information about it at different times, it's like kind of revealing how weird our emotional attachment, our emotional reaction to the events are. Because the actual act of killing the 4 people doesn't actually have the emotional value until you know the true context, right? And that's kind of a weird twist on things.
Well, and the whole movie's, basically about unraveling context, right? Because you don't even know till the very end, or not the very end, but you don't know till like a good, I don't even know what, 45 minutes in, maybe an hour in, when you meet Mademoiselle. Like, you don't even know why these people are being tortured for the longest time. And then you don't even know, like, and it's, no one transcends until the very end. So it's like, it's all, a seep. It's like a slow, something. It's like pouring a liquid out of a bottle of water very slowly, and it keeps on coming. It keeps on coming, and you're wondering what's next. What's next? And it's also like commenting on the family being murdered in the beginning. If I put on my like moral hat, or if I think about moral intuitions I had when I'm watching the movie, it's like I still feel like it was a tragedy that the children died, right? It's like, the parents, of course, were the ones torturing, so you can feel less sympathy towards them, or you can even justify the revenge plot, like they tortured her, so they have a right, they should die. But then it's like the kids, well, the kids are just there, like their parents just happened to be torturers, and they just happened to be in the house when Lucy not broke in, but Lucy knocked on the door. She didn't even break in; she just knocked on the door, right? And so it's like, unfortunately, they're like innocent victims even in their revenge plot, or they're innocent victims even in that part of the movie where you're like, well, she's getting back at her torturers, and a couple innocent dead kids along the way. It's like, oh no, the cycle, the way violence can be perpetuated, and the way innocent people can be killed, or along the way, even by people who were also victims. It's that cycle of abuse and cycle of violence, and the long lasting psychological ramifications that, perhaps never go away. Like, if you've been through that kind of torture, perhaps you're never fully, normal again, however we're defining normal. I'll let you jump in. There's actually a kind of a little thought experiment I want to run in, and it's I don't know. We don't have to talk about it very long, and we don't even have to go down that rabbit hole. But if you want to respond to what I said just now before that.
I was just going to add that, like, the whole thing on revenge is, like, in a way, the kids are unexpected, like, bystanders, but it's also like, well, they tortured her, so it almost seems justified that she should, it's like, in a way, you could argue that's morally justified for her to do whatever she wants back. And whatever she wants back would be as damaging to the people who torture her as possible. And, like, what's more damaging than killing somebody and their kids? It's like, well, the kids didn't bring it on themselves, but it's also like, yeah, I was very conflicted thinking about that for a while. I'll just say that. So I like that you brought that up. And that's like when people kind of argue that you should let it go, and it's like, and they'll kind of argue that revenge is immoral, based on kind of pointing to something like this by saying, well, it perpetuates itself. And I don't know if I'm that sympathetic to being immoral because of that, but I'm obviously sympathetic to it does self-perpetuate. And that's a problem. Like, in terms of game theory and how it could play out, it makes sense that this is a race to the bottom. So what do you do about that? There's not really a good answer. But yeah, you can go ahead with the thought experiment.
So I don't know if I don't know how much I believe in the concept of martyrdom. But I want to, this little thought experiment will give a possible defense of that idea and a possible interpretation of Anna's character in the movie. And I'm reminded So occasionally we shout out people on the show, such as Carl Nord. And he said this one, I guess we were talking about the American Civil War, a very random topic, but I'm connecting it, I promise. And he said something which I just thought about now, and I just drew a weird, connection web in my head as we were talking. He said, the best thing Abraham Lincoln did was get assassinated. And he was also saying, he was saying the same thing for like Julius Caesar. And so that makes me wonder, this is basically pushing back on the argument you put forward earlier. But I still think it might be interesting to explore just a little further. Is like Lucy, or not Lucy, sorry, Anna had a transcendent experience. And it's like, so was the best thing Lucy did was to let the people torture her. Like if we don't interpret the movie from an atheist lens, if we interpret it from she truly transcended, she truly touched the divine. Is there a place for death if in our concept of value? Can someone be more valuable? Well, this is going to be a horrible sentence. I was going to say, could someone be more valuable dead than alive? But it's like, could Anna's being utterly destroyed, but if she connected to the divine, was that sort of the price that had to be paid for mankind to connect to the divine? Was that in the same way that Jesus Christ had to die for our sins? Did Anna have to die for us to contact God, for us to contact a transcendent state? This goes back to the Christian messaging I was talking about. I know you're not sympathetic to any of that, but it's an interesting thought experiment, I think.
Yeah. Well, if you're curious what I would say, when I kind of criticize martyrdom in like a Randian way, it's more because these people, and this is the whole thing about how Rand gets criticized for being pro-selfishness. Her definition of selfishness is just different than your conceptual. The normal conceptualization of selfishness is different from how Rand puts it. So of course people interpret it based on their vernacular, not Rand's. But the whole thing that Rand tries to essentially say is if your wife was sick and then you took a day off work to take care of your wife, if you say, I only did that because that made my wife feel better, it didn't do anything for me, then it'd be okay, you're being a martyr about it. But if you took care of your wife because making her feels good makes you feel good, then you're not being a martyr. You're still doing it for yourself because helping people you love is good for yourself, right? So the way that I look at it is, if Anna or if anybody chose to suffer a great deal and put themselves on the stake, and they did it in spoken words for society, but in reality it's because they want to sacrifice themselves for society. They think that is their end. This is the whole subjective valuation of your own life and your own subjective evaluation of what you care about, right? So if Anna's whole thing was I don't really have a purpose and I can sacrifice myself, then it would be something that I'd say, I guess that's fine. That's what she thinks her peak fulfillment could be, and that's a viable possibility of it. But they chose her and they tortured her and she didn't have a say in it. And it's I don't think there is a we there to make those subjective evaluations unless the person who gets tortured is part of the we. She wasn't part of the we. I think it's an easy no, of course not, in terms of you have to take Anna's perspective into account. And Anna's perspective probably didn't like being tortured. And if she did, then it was a martyrdom, because she did get something out of it in her view. And once you get something out of it on your own end, you're not doing it out of selflessness. So that's my kind of take on it. So for you to be a martyr, I think you inherently have to not be happy about taking on the burden in a way, which is kind of where the Christ story falls apart a little bit for me in the reading. If he brought it upon himself in any way, or if he's kind of happy to take on the burden, well, it's then it's not really selfless anymore.
I mean, I guess I'm sort of wondering. You have to give me a second. I had a thought, but I've forgotten. I'm trying to formulate it in the best way.
Yeah, I do know that's like a very definitional answer, but I almost have to give that answer because as much as somebody like if you had like Keegan on, I feel like he would have totally gone down that thought experiment with you. But the language that's like endemic to that question is stuff that like in a Randian way I just like reject. So I can't even like postulate it in the way that you want it to be thought about. I just think that's like a wrong way of thinking about people. That's why I kind of gave you a hard answer, which probably isn't fun. But at some point, I had to say something that alienated my we had to do this neutral upset about a movie we both liked, so I had to alienate us in like a weirdly nuanced way at the end.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just interesting, like what. I guess how much, like, what sacrifices are does one have to make in certain in certain situations, or what sacrifices do collectives have to make in certain situations? When is that justified? Is that ever justified? And with Anna, you're yeah. I mean, in the universe, she has no say in this. And I think the interpretation does fall apart, or it probably falls apart if you don't assume she contacted something beyond herself. But then, I guess you could have asked yourself, well, why do martyrs exist? Like, why do we have martyrs? I mean, martyr, the word just means witness. What was Anna a witness to? Is Anna a witness to how horrible human beings can be? Was Anna a witness to the divine? Was Anna a witness to both? Is there some other possibility that we haven't even conceived of? Like what does it mean if martyr means witness? What is a martyr witnessing? Are they witnessing their own self-destruction or their own self-sacrifice for this cause or that cause? Are they witnessing or like Socrates? I mean, Socrates isn't a Christian figure, but he was a martyr. Like, what was Socrates witnessing? I mean, I guess you could say he was like witnessing the destruction of Athens. He was witnessing in Athens, like, kind of shooting itself in the foot by killing one of their greatest men. So I don't know. I guess that's sort of the open question I'm leaving. Like, what was Anna a witness to? Like, so I think if we take martyr in that sense, then Anna was a martyr. Because a martyr might not necessarily have to be. You might not necessarily have to choose to be a martyr. Like, because with the Abraham Lincoln analogy, Lincoln didn't choose to be assassinated. He didn't ask to be assassinated, but he was assassinated. And in many ways, you could almost speculate that, well, if he wasn't assassinated, maybe he wouldn't have done as great of a job as people think he would have, and maybe we'd have a terrible, a worse view of Lincoln as a result because he died when he did. It's like, oh, he's this great man. Same with someone like JFK. It's like when someone dies or is assassinated, they become like a myth. They become a legend. They become incorporated into the psyche in sort of in a different way, because they're no longer a person. Like, what does Anna become maybe in the minds of Mademoiselle or the minds of the people in the society or in the minds of the audience? If she died, so she's no longer with us, like a bit of her personhood is gone. But, the idea of Anna or whatever Anna stood for is still with us. Because I'm sort of going on a bit of a rant, but that's to be expected in a movie like this.
Yeah, I think the movie does something challenging because the reason why you keep emphasizing that martyr is witness is because that's the definition it puts on the screen at the end of the movie as it fades to credits, and that is like, it's not inaccurate, but the conventional way that people think of martyrs are people who are killed for their beliefs. And those things are a little bit different, but there is obviously overlap if you choose to read things in a certain way. Or if you take to bear witness in like a faith way or something like that. So I guess in like the witness way, you can say she like witnesses human atrocities, right? But I find it inescapable to think. I think it's funny that you see this very Christian movie, because I took it the opposite, especially because Mademoiselle kills herself at the end. That's really the icing on the cake for me in a lot of ways. So I can't escape that part, and she doesn't really die for her beliefs though. But there is like people, like as you bring up JFK and stuff, they become larger than life once they died. JFK is probably much more famous because he was assassinated than if he, what was voted out or only reelected once and then what was a president in that era. The fact that he was assassinated is why he's borderline superhuman, right? Which is funny because he he did the most human thing, which is dying, really, and being immortal, and that's what made him, escape his. It's what granted him immortality. And I only emphasize that because at the end of the movie, she's literally, skinned. She is like a weird looking creature that barely looks human, right? And she is treated in like this weird way because she is so like fragile in that state and barely alive and barely conscious that she is not treated like a person anymore. Her words were treated like she was a prophet, right? So there is something there to where it's like she has superseded, human mortality in a way, like people like John F. Kennedy and stuff. She's the only person to reach that pinnacle and that experience. So she's in this weird high esteem like famous martyrs are. And maybe the fact that I have a hard time associating the definition they show before the end credit with my reading of the movie shows that my reading of the movie needs work, because he chose to put that a martyr is a witness at the end, and that doesn't jive with how I read the ending. So maybe that shows that that there's a better reading out there. But yeah, I think that is the stuff you have to chew on once you're done with the movie.
Well, and the very, very end. So like after they give the definition of the word martyr, over the credits are the pictures of Anna and Lucy playing as children. So the beginning of the movie was a flashback of finding Lucy in that slaughterhouse in that dilapidated state. And then showing, her in the orphanage and showing her meeting Anna and becoming friends with Anna. And then, at the end to see Anna and Lucy play again. I mean, your heart kind of breaks because you think to yourself, well, look at these nice, little girls. It's like in 30 years or so, they're going to be nothing. I mean, in 30 years, they're going to be shells of their former selves. They're going to be dead. But like maybe, and again, I'm sort of just like, I'm kind of pulling, I don't know. I'm just kind of like interpreting very loosely here. I'm not even saying my interpretations are right, but like, did Lucy or did Anna transcend? So like is showing like Lucy and Annie, and Anna as children again, is that showing that like the way she transcended maybe was not even a religious way. She didn't transcend and find the afterlife, find the divine, but she transcended insofar as there was that little spark of humanity left. There was a little spark of worth or value or however you want to feel that, like, I feel like, I mean, most people sort of have absorbed the Enlightenment idea that humans are just inherently valuable. Throughout most of human history, it was not assumed that people were inherently valuable. It was assumed that most people are expendable, which is why you could build the pyramids of Egypt on the backs of slaves, because the slaves don't matter. What matters is building those pyramids. But then I guess if you think about it in terms of like natural rights then, or natural law, maybe does the transcendence come in through her humanity. Like you can't destroy her humanity, no matter how much you torture Anna, no matter how much, no matter what you do to her, even if you kill her, even if you, even if you do worse, like they do, even if you dehumanize her, there's like something about her that can't be dehumanized. I'm posing all these as questions this episode, but that's because the movie gives me more questions than answers. Again, like I said, there are movies out there where it's like, the movie gives you an answer, and it's like that's the end of the debate. The movie, this means this, and that's what the director wants you to think, or that's what everyone agrees is the meaning of it, and you're like, oh, okay, well, there's nothing else to talk about. Moving on. But this movie doesn't give you an answer. It just raises a ton of questions. It's a very Socratic movie in that sense. And those are the best movies, really. I don't like the movies that, I don't respect the movies that preach to me because they don't respect me. They're telling me you should believe this, and I'm like, why? I'd rather have the movies. I like the movies that ask me questions, because then they're forcing me to answer them myself, which is what you would want, which is what a director should want from his or her audience.
Yeah, we definitely spent a lot going into a lot of parts of this movie, and the thing I would emphasize the most is I have one of the lowest bars for when a movie becomes preachy out of anybody I know, and that's the biggest turnoff for a movie for me. And I get deeply annoyed with films that feel in any way like they're pushing a worldview. And this movie does not reach that low bar, even though I might have said some things that made it sound like the movie did have messaging, because I'm still kind of iffy on a lot of the things I've said. Even if I might feel stronger about what I've said in this episode, more sure that's what they're going for if I'd seen the movie 3 times. But on the first watch, I never felt like I was being told what to think about the world, right? There are real moments of how people act, or they're emblematic of what certain situations could be and things like that. But it's never telling you this is how the world is. And I told you off air probably a few weeks ago, I'm pretty sure we had this conversation, where I realized I do really like dramas. I thought I hated dramas a lot because a lot of them tell you how to think about the world, and they just feel like propaganda if you're a somewhat opinionated person who has any type of view that's out of the norm. And that's frustrating, and that makes me think those movies are total trash. But not all dramas are like that. A lot of dramas just kind of drop hints on what people are like, and they make you meditate on it. And this movie, even though it's an extreme genre film, it still makes you meditate on certain questions if you want to explore them. So I definitely would give it a recommendation on that in that regard. Do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I guess I would add that every work of art has a point of view. So I'm not suggesting their movie doesn't have a point of view, and I'm not suggesting you can't take the whole this whole conversation has been us, suggesting interpretations of this scene or of this character. So when I suggest the movie is more of a blank canvas, I'm not saying therefore the movie doesn't have a point of view. And everything has a point of view. Everything's propaganda, to use Orwell's brilliant phrase. So you don't, I'm not taking anything for granted. Not even in this movie. But I was emphasizing, I guess, how impersonal the many of the scenes felt to me, and I was emphasizing the contrast between this and what your typical girl boss movie, let's say, where the moral is, oh, she's a girl boss. It's like, gee, thanks. Very brilliant, guys, very creative. That might have been a controversial thing for me to put on the internet, but there you go.
Yeah, if you'd recommended we watch a girl boss movie, I would have blatantly shut you down without any remorse. But fortunately, we will not review a movie like that anytime in the future. Like, I remember when we talked about The Girl on the Third Floor, and I was like, yeah, this is a feminist movie or something like that. And it's like, why is it a feminist movie? Well, it's not a girl boss movie, so it's not beating you over the head with it. But that's aside the point. We appreciate you guys sticking out for this podcast, and hopefully, if you've watched the movie, that this is almost like I like to think that this was kind of like in a much more sporadic way. It was like a worksheet you'd get if you watched a movie for like an English lit class. That has like 8 questions, and we kind of formed questions or emphasized certain scenes. It's like, hey, take a look back at this scene. How do you feel about the conflict of emotions here? And in the end, I love watching junk, and just kind of letting it wave over me. But sometimes I want to watch something that's a little more thought-provoking, or at least a little more quality. Because I do watch, I mean, I have a poster for the Sharknado movies in my room, so maybe I'm not the best film critic. But yeah, I talked about this movie for over an hour, and I'm happy I did. But you can find more of our content. If you look up Beyond Talking Points on YouTube or any podcatcher, you'll find, 75 other episodes on all sorts of stuff, ranging from politics to policy, to strategy, to morals, to ethics, to a couple other movie reviews. So we've covered the whole gambit in that front. I would add that I guess it was somewhat recent. Since we last recorded, I was on Keegan's podcast, the Nietzsche podcast, and Matt was also, if you did not catch that interview, he was also on there before me, and those are worth checking out. Just to give another plug, you can find Matt's podcast, The Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse, on a podcatcher, and my podcast, The Obey Podcast, on a podcatcher. Both of us have been not updating those as frequently, but there's still backlogged content there that can always be, checked out and thought about.
In fact, I did just upload a. So not only not only does Joe Rogan get away with uploading 3 hours, a 3-hour podcast, I now, Matthew Hazelwood, get away with uploading a 3-hour podcast. A friend of mine, I met him through Keegan. He's actually on Keegan's podcast as well. But Mina, we had a 3-hour conversation, probably even back in like October or something, and I just never got around to uploading it or editing it. And so finally, I edited it and uploaded that a couple days ago. So hopefully, I'll get more content out there in the future. Hopefully, both of us will.
Yeah,
together and separate.
Yeah, because there's always stuff to talk about and always things to explore and always stuff to rant about. And I'll have to check that out too, because I've heard her name a few times and seen it pop up on a few feeds, but I'm not familiar with Mina. But yeah, sorry, my brain fogged up there for a second. That's what happens when we talk about Martyrs for an hour and 25 minutes.
And we still didn't say all we could say, but
yeah. Well, we went through all my notes. I'm satisfied. But hopefully we'll get more stuff out soon. Hopefully we'll have some free time to talk about all sorts of stuff, because a lot's happened since we last talked. But signing off for now is Matt. Thank you guys for listening.